I have left Wyll and the Warlock for last for my Baldur's Gate 3 early access builds because, well, it's pretty simple. Just Eldritch Blast everything. Enemy far away, Eldritch Blast. Enemy too close, Eldritch Blast. Traders' prices too high, just Eldritch Blast them. I'm sure that'll help. Anyway, let's get into it. This video is sponsored by me. I have made a class guide for all of the classes in the early access, so if this is your first video of mine that you're watching, please do go check those ones out because it's got some valuable information on all the classes in the early access. Now let's get into it. The focus for this build and all Warlocks really is to Eldritch Blast whenever and wherever possible, and also on buffing this ability as much as you can. Eldritch Blast is a ranged cantrip that you can get at level 1, and it does a 1d10 force damage to enemies that you hit, so the damage will range from 1 damage to 10 at the start of the game, which is a really powerful spell for the early stages of the game. Being a cantrip as well, you can spam this as much as you like, and it is ranged so you can hit anyone all day long. Warlocks also get extra creatures at level 3 in the Find Familiar spell, like an Imp and a Quisette. These familiars are a little bit more helpful in combat than the typical Find Familiar companions that you do get, especially the Imp, which can fly and also turn invisible so you can just zoom around the battlefield or even before a fight starts and really get the lay of the land. A Warlock spellcasting ability is also charisma, so they do well as your primary talking head when you do engage in combat, as you want to maximize those charisma based rolls, so they will get a lot of benefits from being your main talking person in combat, especially if you make a custom character and just roll everywhere with this person. Now let's talk about building out this custom character. Starting off with race, the Asmodeus and Mephistopheles Tiefling are the great choice for this class. They get a +2 to charisma, and you also get dark vision and hellish resistance, which is good to take half damage from fire, but the dark vision is what's really important. You could also go the half elf variant, which will also give you the +2 to charisma and dark vision, and you can put 2 points into any of the abilities, which I would say to put into dexterity and constitution respectively. In terms of your background and skills, as always, this is personal preference, but you should be focusing on the charisma skills to maximize your build, these being deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. This is always a good idea to start off with. You could also put some stuff into the dexterity skills, as you will have a decent dexterity, but as a quick notice, if you are looking at some of the proficiencies, you will get or could get at level 2 the proficiencies in persuasion and deception by a specific class passive, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So if you are going to pick that passive, then maybe don't choose persuasion and deception here. However, for this build, we don't actually pick that option. It's just another option to keep in mind. For attributes, your focus here is getting charisma to 17 in the character creator, putting the rest of your points into dexterity for the armor class and the initiative, and then into constitution for the extra HP. Strength, wisdom, and intelligence aren't important for these builds, so you can minimize them as much as you like. When building out your Warlock, you will also get to choose between 2 subclasses, the Fiend and the Great Old One. The Great Old One gives you access to 2 unique spells, Dissonance Whispers, which does a 3d6 psychic damage, and it is a ranged attack, which will also frighten enemies if it passes the saving throw. Touchy's Hideous Laughter is the other ability, which if the creature fails a wisdom saving throw, it will throw them prone and they'll become incapacitated, but this spell does require concentration. We won't be choosing this option. We will be choosing the Fiend as our subclass, as the Fiend grants Dark One's Blessing, which when you reduce a creature's health to 0, so basically killing it, you gain a temporary hit points based on your charisma modifier and your level. As a Warlock, you deal a ton of damage and you are regularly finishing off your target using Eldritch Blast. In my experience, this passive is stronger as in combat, as you will predominantly be using Eldritch Blast as your main attack, and you don't want to be using any of the 2 attacks from the other subclass, and this also just gives you a bonus when you do finish off enemies, so you can tank a few extra hits. Now let's talk about cantrips. Eldritch Blast is the main thing you need to pick up as always. The second option is a little bit of personal preference, although I do recommend True Strike, so you get advantage on attack rolls or friends, so you can further increase your charisma checks success chance. For your starting spells, I would avoid anything that requires you to be in melee range, such as Burning Hands and Arms of Ada, because we are going to stay at range as best that we can. I do like Hex for this option, as it gives a creature disadvantage on saving throws of an attribute of your choice. So for example, if you have a cleric in your party using Sacred Flame, you can give them a Hex to dexterity and it will increase the chances of Sacred Flame hitting, but this also does an extra 1d6 damage whenever you hit the target. So when you use Eldritch Blast, this is basically just a straight buff for that ability as well. The other option is personal preference. I do like Hellish Rebuke to deal some free fire damage, as it does consume an action when you do get hit, and Armor of Agathis for some extra temporary HP and some cold damage to enemies if they get too close to you is also a good option. Now it is time to level up your Warlock. At level 2, you gain the Eldritch Invocations. Agonizing Blast is an absolute must to pick up here, as it does add your Charisma modifier to your Eldritch Blast damage, so that's just a straight 3 to 4 damage increase on every attack you do with Eldritch Blast. Your second invocation can be personal preference. You could pick the Beguiling Influence like we touched on earlier, which will give you the Deception and Persuasion proficiencies if you are looking for those options. However, I personally like the Mage Armor here, as it will grant you a higher AC than wearing Light Armor will, and as a Warlock you do get focused a little bit in combat. Another option you could go for is Fiendish Vigor, which will grant you the False Life spell, which also pairs well with our Fiend Warlock here, as it will give you even more temporary hit points to play with. You will also get to pick a spell here, and it is personal preference what you do choose. For Wyll, this is where you can pick up Hex, but on your custom character it's personal preference, just keeping in mind to avoid the melee focused spells. At level 3, you are granted the Pact Boon passive, which will allow you to summon a familiar. As a Warlock you do get extra creatures, being the Imp and the Quisette. My personal preference here would be the Imp, so you can fly around and remain invisible. You can get some sneaky stealth kills, and they're also pretty strong in combat with their attacks. You will also gain extra spells here and have more to choose from in your list. I personally recommend picking up Misty Step, as it is a bonus action cast, which will still allow you to cast Eldritch Blast in the same turn, and Misty Step allows you to freely move around the battlefield, so if something gets too close you can Misty Step out of the way, you can Misty Step to higher ground. It's a very versatile spell to pick up. At level 4, which is the max level for the early access, you do gain a cantrip. Have a read of the options here. A couple of standouts is Mage Hand, as it has a number of uses outside of combat, and if you didn't pick it up earlier, True Strike will give you advantage on attack rolls against creatures, very valuable to pick up, so your Eldritch Blast isn't missing very often. Choosing a spell here again is personal preference. I do like Scorching Ray, as it is a high damage spell that hits multiple targets with fire damage. At level 4, you also get to pick a feat, and the main goal of your Warlock is to get your Charisma to as high as possible, so in the early access that would be 18. For Wyll, this means both points into Charisma, and for your custom character it means you only need to put 1 point into Charisma, and you can put that second point into either Dexterity or Constitution, depending on which one is on an odd number currently. The main reason for this is to get that additional 1 extra damage from your Eldritch Blast from having your Charisma on 18, because it's really just about buffing your Eldritch Blast as much as possible. In terms of equipment, there isn't much really to look at in the early access that benefits a Warlock. The main item would be the Misty Step Amulet, which allows you to Misty Step without consuming one of your spell slots, so it just gives you a little bit extra freedom in your spell slots with that. You should also be wearing robes if you have gone the Mage Armor route, because you can't wear Light Armor and the Mage Armor as well. So just put some robes on and then use Mage Armor. It'll give you more armor class than just wearing Light Armor. For playing this build, the first tip is to use your Imp outside of combat in its invisibility state to zoom around and scope out the battlefield and what's ahead of you. This is a really valuable way to find out how many enemies there are, where they're positioned, and anything that you may need to be aware of in the fight. The Imp can freely fly around, and you can set them up behind enemies and start the combat from a stealth attack and have them nice and deep in the combat, and hopefully take some of that damage that may come your way. You should also be trying to get on the high ground as much as possible for the advantage on your Eldritch Blast, and to give enemies disadvantage on you, as you are a weaker class. You do want to be avoiding as much damage as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, start conversations with your Warlock, as they have such a high charisma. This is the best opportunity to pass the charisma related skill checks, which are everywhere throughout this game. This just really sets you up for the best opportunity to pass these checks. Warlocks also recover their spell slots on a short rest, unlike the other classes in the game, so you don't actually need to long rest if you do want to recover your spell slots. You can just short rest, get a couple extra back, and away you go. And that is the Eldritch Blast and the Warlock. Please let me know in the comments what you think of this build and things that you would change. There's a little bit of choice in how you can build out the Warlock, but the main benefit here is just Eldritch Blasting everything on the map. Please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on Twitch, where I stream 3 days a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, Australian night times. Hope to see you guys there in the next stream. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.